One of the things that I found most difficult as pastor is keeping away from the church, not travelling into the building, not being there. You're so used to being there, so used to checking everything's all right, are the doors all shut, is it safe, what's going on in the local area, nosing around. And of course, I've not been doing that. When I have been tempted to I just want to drive in and just see what's going on, family and others have said, Ken, do you really need to go? But I did go in one day this week to check with the community kitchen, to order some supplies, make sure everything was going well. And as I arrived kind of quite early in the morning, about 9 o'clock or so, there was a young woman who was just in the street outside and she was taking photographs. And as I was approaching the church door, I saw that she was taking photographs of the door. Now, it's not a very exciting door. It's an old wooden door, but we've got some notices on the door that to do with the building and how it's being used during this time. And I got chatting to her, and she's a photographer. And what she was doing was using every day, she did a daily exercise to walk around the area and to journal the area and what it's like during this time, taking photographs of places like Portobello Road that are normally absolutely rammed with people, and how quiet they are. And it's a different life today. The world has changed. We're living in changed times, and our actions are very different, and perhaps our expectations are changed. They're more around keeping safe, keeping ourselves and others safe. All around, things are filled with reports of images that strike us of pain, of loss, of sacrifice, of suffering, of grief and joy too, as people perhaps recover, or the joy of seeing others helping one another, as the joy I've experienced recently in seeing people providing for the poorest and most vulnerable. We've seen appreciation for what the NHS and others are doing, but also disdain perhaps at the way others are flouting the regulations. We're doing all we can as a nation, or as individuals. We're trying to do all we can to keep control of the situation. And yet, in truth, we must acknowledge that much of it is beyond our control. Life, death, health, work, the future. I'm reminded of Ecclesiastes 3. Let me read you a few verses from the beginning. These verses we've probably read a lot, but at this moment in time, they're very poignant and perhaps difficult to read it all. Let me just read you a few verses. For everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance. Passage, and it goes on, is all about time and how for all our endeavours, all our planning, all our knowledge, all our technology and all our resources, the important things around which our lives revolve are ultimately beyond our control. In it, it seems hopeless and even futile at times. But when we look on, we begin to realise, as the writer did, that the meaning of life, the meaning of who we are, the meaning of everything only matters if we see an eternal perspective. And so that's what I want us to do today. And my title is Eternal Thinking, that we become people who think of the eternal aspects of life, that begin to recognise that life is not meaningless, it's not random, it's not a result of some freak accident of the universe, but it derives from God, from his thinking, from his planning, from his desire. Life begins to make sense with all its pains, losses, joys and gains when we understand that God planned us for eternity and not just for a few decades or a few years. Verse 11 of the same chapter says this: Yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. Once we recognise this, then we begin to live our lives with a new, eternal perspective. Life begins to make sense. So what about applying that to today in the world, the very changed world that we're in? Yesterday I watched the press conference of the President of the USA, and over nearly 2 hours you could see the conflict within him. He wanted to say all is okay. He wanted to say that things were under control and that soon everything would be back to normal. Yet, at the same time, he had to defer to the medical people, the scientists around him, who in turn had models, projections and hope for the future, but no guarantees. The best minds, the strongest leaders, the greatest organisers and the wealthiest people in nations are all humbled in the face of this invisible foe. Solomon is probably behind Ecclesiastes, and he is known for having immense wealth, but also being one of the wisest people that's ever walked the planet. And yet he was unable to cheat the times and the seasons. Far from pessimism, this part of Scripture ultimately encourages me that through all the vicissitudes of life, God's eternal plans and his purposes remain on track. Our life should be lived with eternity in mind and not the narrow focus on the immediate, which, let's be honest, is what we mostly do. And that has led so many Christians over the years to be at the forefront of poverty relief, of medicine, of caring, of science and education. Now, I'm not saying that others of no faith and all faiths don't do this, some of the same. Of course they do. God has put eternity in our hearts. For those who know him or don't know him, there's something of God in all of us. Paul writes in Romans in the New Testament how that there is some hint of God, even very faint in some, but some hint of God, the God who made us in his own image. And that is in every single person. We were made for eternity. We need to have an eternal aspect to our lives. We need to have that eternal focus. We need to think about eternity. So in conclusion, Jesus explained his mission as to bring the good news to the poor, to proclaim freedom for those who are held captive, to bring sight to the blind and set the oppressed free. Christians throughout history since then have seen his mission as our mission. Living for eternity means that we are here for others. We're here to share not just the message, but in our actions, the heart and the attitude and the life of Jesus to the world around us. We don't seek to be martyrs. We're not putting ourselves at stupid risks because that will get us some credit in heaven. No, it doesn't do that. But we do seek to live our lives out for the purposes of God. And that it's not just the here and now. It's not just our immediate family. It's not just our immediate surroundings. But we're living our lives for eternity and for eternal cause. So today we can do this by one, staying in to protect others. We can do it by, secondly, meeting needs where we can. There are needs all around us. We've shared a little bit about the community kitchen. We've shared about the girl just putting on a nice sign as people walk past that they'll be encouraged. We can pray. We can pray for people we know, people we don't know. Got great concern for much of the world that don't have the resources of the West, and we can pray for God's mercy, for God's heart to reach out. Fourthly, we can encourage people. Pick up the phone, send a text, an email, social media, all those great things that we can do now.